Okay, folks, let's get back at it here with section 1.2, displaying quantitative data with graphs. We've done page 1, we've done page 2, now on to page 3. In page 3, we're going to talk about a really important graph, and that is the histogram. We've already talked about dot plots, we've talked about stem plots. Today we're going to see one that's probably, I don't want to call it the most famous statistical graph, but it's one that you're going to see more often than any of the others, so perhaps it's the most popular. Histogram is a graph that displays the distribution of a quantitative variable. Important, don't forget we're talking about quantitative variables here. Horizontal axis is marked in the units of measurement for the variable. The vertical axis contains the scale of counts or percents, so it's frequency or relative frequency. Each bar in the graph represents an equal class width. Okay, this statement here is really important. For a histogram, you should always choose equal class widths, otherwise you can distort the picture of the distribution. Last but not least, the base of the bar covers the class, and the bar height is the class frequency or relative frequency. Okay, so let's learn about histograms with an example. I have here some data for NBA team scoring averages. The table represents the average points scored per game. That's abbreviated PPG, for the 30 NBA teams in the 2012 and 13 regular season. Create a histogram of the distribution, then describe the distribution based solely on the histogram. So when I go to describe the distribution, I'm going to ignore the fact that I have all the data in front of me and just talk about the distribution based on the picture. Okay, so in order to create this histogram, I have several different ways we could do it. We could do it manually, which would be tedious and ridiculous. So I'm going to use technology here. I'm going to jump over and take a look at Google Sheets. So what I have here is the data that you saw in the notes page. And I am going to go ahead, and this time I'll make sure I grab the bottom row. But I'm going to go ahead and highlight that data. And I'm going to say Insert Chart. Bang, there's a chart. Well, that chart is not very meaningful to me. That's just showing every team here and then whatever their points per game is on the y-axis. That's basically treating it like a categorical variable and showing us a bar chart. Well, what we want is a histogram. First thing I want to do is get rid of this right there, that legend. I don't like the legend there. It just kind of wastes some space. So now let's go to chart style. And what I want to do is pick, I'm going to go to chart type. I don't want a column chart. I'm going to go scroll all the way down to other. Hey, look at that. It says histogram chart. It's such an important chart. I have no idea why they bury it down here near the bottom of the menu. But I'm going to go ahead, grip it and rip it and pick a histogram, and look at that, folks. It has created a histogram for me. In fact, it's quite a beautiful histogram. It has automatically chosen a class width for us of 4 points per game. It gives us a nice picture of the distribution. I'm going to talk more about how we pick class widths in the future, but for now, here is our histogram. You're probably going to have to manually copy that over to your notes, but that's not too difficult. You've got one class that has 5 units in it. You've got one class with 11 observations, 8, 4, and 2. That's not too difficult. So let's jump back over here to the notes, and through the magic of modern technology, there's our histogram. Oh, that's glorious, folks. That's really exciting. I'm just going to make a note here on each of these counts. That was 5, 11, 8, 4, and 2. Those are the teams within each class. The class, again, is the width of each of these breaks on the x-axis. Again, that goes from 90 to 94, 94 to 98, etc. If you add up all of those counts, you'll get 30, and that's because in 2012 there's 30 NBA teams, so that's good. I do want to make a note here about the class width from 90 to 94. You might ask yourself, what if a team is right at 94? Do you put them in the left class or the right class? Well, there's a standard for that, and it is always to be included in the class to the right. So I'm going to say that this class right here goes from 90 points per game included to less than 94. So the left endpoint is always included in the class. The right endpoint is not included. It belongs to the next class to the right. So that's a quick intro on histograms there. I'm going to show you some more technology here in just a second, but now I want to go back and answer the question that was asked. The question was, describe the distribution based solely on the histogram. So I'm going to ignore the data and pretend that all I had is that histogram to describe this distribution. Here's how I would describe it. The distribution of NBA team scoring average in 2012 and 13 was slightly skewed to the right. The center was between 94 and 98 points per game. And how did I identify that center? Well, I have 30 teams. So the center of the distribution is between the 15th and 16th observation, and that occurs in this class right here. You'll notice that I didn't say exactly what the center was, and that's because, again, I asked you to describe the distribution based solely on the histogram. So I don't know exactly what the center is, I just know that it's in that class. Team scoring average varied from around 90 points per game to around 110. Notice that I'm kind of vague here and I say around because I'm including the left-hand boundary of the histogram and the right-hand boundary of the histogram as my spread. Last but not least, there are no apparent outliers in the distribution, and that's because I don't see any observations in the histogram that are drastically different from the pattern in the data. So I've hit all 4 characteristics I need to describe the distribution. That's great. We're done with this problem. There's only one last thing I want to show you here. I would like to show you how to create a histogram on the TI Nspire CAS calculator. So what I'm going to do in order to do that is I have all the data here. And one of the nice things about the Nspire, especially when you're, well, I guess this only applies when you're using a computer, is I can cut and paste data. So I'm going to go in here and create a new document. When you create a new document on the Nspire, you have 9 different options. Okay, we're going to spend most of our time in this class in option 1, just a calculator page, and then options 4 and 5. You might be saying, well, what about graphs? Aren't we going to graph stuff in this class? Most of the graphs we do in statistics will be in a data and statistics page. Well, I'm going to start with a spreadsheet, and I'm going to go ahead and name this variable PPG, points per game, and then I'm just going to right-click and paste. You can also do a Control-V, Control-C, Control-V, Control-X, work in the TI Nspire on the keyboard just like they do on a computer. Okay, so I have my data copied in there. It's in a spreadsheet. That's great, but I would like to see a histogram. So I'm going to add a new page, and now I'm going to select Data and Statistics, and this is where I'm going to do all my statistical graphs in a Data and Statistics page. Right now it looks like just a random sprinkling of dots, and that's what it is. Those are all of our data points, but the calculator doesn't exactly know how I want to graph them yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a variable to my x-axis, and the only variable I have in this file is PPG. And you'll notice that it defaults to a dot plot. This is the dot plot which we learned about earlier. I'd like to see a histogram, so I'm going to change it to histogram, and then it's going to pick class widths that it thinks make sense. Well, I don't necessarily like this graph as much as the one that that Google Sheets created, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change some of the bin settings. Notice that it is using the calculator is using the term bin. I use the term class. Those two terms are interchangeable when we're talking about histograms. So I'm always going to choose equal bin width, and I believe the bin width on our original histogram we did was 4. And I believe the alignment, or the left-hand endpoint, was 90, so I'm going to match that with what I did in Google Sheets. I'm going to grip it and rip it, and oh my goodness, we have problems. Everything's off the screen, so I need to kind of adjust here to go all the way over to 90. And then here I need to pull this in a little bit so I can see my right-hand class, and then drag down the y-axis so I can see the histogram in all its glory. On the Nspire, if you hover over a class, it'll tell you what the boundary is for the class as well as how many observations are in that. And you'll notice this matches the 5, 11, 8, 4, and 2 that we had on the notes page. All right, folks, that's it for histograms. I'm going to shut it down here, and then we'll move over to page 4 in just a second.